Daniel Parker, a 35-year-old gardener, had been working at Helen Morgan's mansion for over a decade. He was a dedicated and loyal employee, always tending to the vast garden with great care and affection. Daniel found solace and peace working with the earth, and his dedication made him more than just an employee. He was a close friend to Helen. Helen Morgan, an 82-year-old woman, had lived alone in the old mansion since the death of her husband, Edward. Despite her advanced age, Helen was a strong and determined woman who maintained her home and garden with great love. Daniel and Helen shared many conversations about life and memories of Edward, creating a special bond. One sunny morning, while Helen and Daniel were in the garden planting new flowers, the mansion's phone rang. Helen went to answer and heard her daughter Sarah's voice on the other end of the line. "Mom, Richard and I are worried about you living alone in that huge house. We think it's time for you to move to a nursing home where you'll have care and company." Helen sighed, having had this discussion many times before. "Sarah, I'm fine here. This is my home, and the garden means everything to me. But, Mom, it's dangerous for you to stay alone. Richard and I have discussed it, and we think it's the best decision. Please think about it." After the call, Helen was visibly upset. Daniel noticed and asked, "Is everything all right, Helen?" Helen shook her head. "My children want me to move to a nursing home and sell the mansion. They don't understand how much this place means to me." Helen decided she wouldn't leave the mansion and the garden without a fight. She knew Daniel shared her passion for the garden and wanted him to continue caring for it if anything happened to her. Determined, Helen called Daniel for a conversation. "Daniel, I need to ask you a very important favor," Helen said, her voice trembling slightly. "If anything happens to me and my children sell the house, I want you to take care of the garden. This place means so much to me and Edward. I trust you to keep it alive." Daniel was moved by Helen's request and promised to do everything he could to protect the garden. "You can count on me, Helen. I'll take care of the garden as if it were my own." Sarah and Richard, motivated by greed, decided they would do anything to get Helen out of the mansion and sell the property. They began planning a way to remove her against her will, without her knowing their true motives. Sarah and Richard knew convincing Helen to leave on her own would be impossible. They decided to act behind the scenes, manipulating situations to make Helen stay at the mansion unbearable. First, they started spreading rumors around town about Helen's mental health, suggesting she was no longer capable of taking care of herself. They also hired people to make scary noises at night in the mansion, hoping Helen would feel unsafe and scared. Their goal was to make her accept moving to a nursing home, believing she could no longer live alone. Sarah and Richard's plans were working. Helen began to feel unsafe in her own home. One night, after hearing strange noises for the third time that week, Helen called Sarah in a panic. "Mom, I'm coming over right now." "You can't live like this anymore," said Sarah, trying to sound concerned but hiding her true intention. The next day, Sarah and Richard arrived at the mansion with a team of doctors and social workers, claiming Helen was no longer capable of taking care of herself. Helen was removed against her will and taken to a nursing home. She protested, but it was in vain. Daniel, arriving for work in the garden, found out what had happened and was devastated. Daniel couldn't accept what had happened to Helen. Determined to find out the truth and help his friend, he began investigating. First, he talked to neighbors and locals, trying to find out where Helen had been taken. Everyone knew something was wrong, but no one had concrete information. Daniel then decided to seek help from his friend Lucy, a young botany student he had known for many years. Lucy was intelligent and determined, and together they began visiting all the nursing homes in the area searching for Helen. After days of tireless searching, Daniel and Lucy finally found Helen in a distant nursing home. Helen was visibly distressed, but her joy at seeing Daniel brought a smile to her face. Daniel rushed to embrace Helen, who was sitting in a wheelchair. "Helen, I promised I would take care of you." "I'm here now," he said, tears in his eyes. Helen held Daniel's hand and whispered, "Daniel, you need to take care of the garden and the mansion. Don't let my children sell it. The garden is my legacy, and I trust you to keep it alive." Daniel promised Helen he would do everything he could to protect the garden and the mansion. They spent time together, reminiscing and sharing stories. Helen, already frail, seemed to gain strength from Daniel's presence. A few days after the reunion, Helen passed away. Daniel was devastated by the loss of his friend, but he was determined to fulfill the promise he had made. On the day of the funeral, Helen's children, Sarah and Richard, were present but seemed more concerned with discussing the sale of the mansion. After the funeral, Helen's lawyer asked to speak with Sarah, Richard, and Daniel privately. They gathered in the living room of the nursing home, where the lawyer prepared to read the will. Helen Morgan's will was written with clarity and full consciousness, began the lawyer. She had a few specific wishes she wanted to be respected. Sarah and Richard exchanged anxious glances, eager to know what they would receive. Helen's first wish is that all her movable assets be sold, and the proceeds donated to charities, continued the lawyer. As for the mansion and the garden, Helen expressed her clear will. The lawyer looked directly at Daniel before continuing. Helen left the mansion and the garden to Daniel Parker. She trusted that he would care for the place as she always did and keep the memory of Edward and her alive through the garden. Sarah and Richard were furious. This is ridiculous. He manipulated her. We want to contest this will, shouted Sarah. The lawyer remained calm. Helen made this choice with full consciousness. I'm sure if you contest it, the court will see that her decision was made rationally and independently. In disbelief at the decision, Sarah and Richard tried everything to overturn their mother's will. They hired expensive lawyers and initiated a legal battle against Daniel. They claimed Helen was not in her right mind when she made the will and tried to prove Daniel had unduly influenced her. Daniel, with the support of Lucy and the local community, fought to defend Helen's last wish. The legal battle was arduous and emotionally exhausting. Witnesses were called, and the truth about Sarah and Richard's attempt to force Helen out of her home was revealed in court. Finally, after months of legal battles, the court ruled in Daniel's favor. Sarah and Richard were despondent but had no choice but to accept the decision. The mansion and garden would remain under Daniel's care. Daniel moved into the mansion, dedicating himself to keeping the garden in perfect condition, always in memory of Helen and Edward. He tended to each plant with the same care and attention that Helen had. With each blooming flower, Daniel felt Helen's presence, knowing he had fulfilled his promise. The mansion, under his care, became a refuge of peace and beauty, exactly as Helen and Edward had planned. Dear viewers, if you enjoyed the story, please support the video by liking it and subscribing to the channel. Thank you so much.